Hello, Rush Nation. It is week 8. I believe it's week 8. It's that many weeks are just blending all together now. It's kind of hard to lose track of time very easily. But I believe we're in week 8 now. As you can see, we have not got Lewis or Pittsy here with us today on Fast Action Friday, but I am happy to be joined by Nathan, Mountain Drew 92. He is joining us. Nathan, welcome to Fast Action Friday. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Cheers. Thanks, Rob. Yeah, thanks for having me. Look, yeah, I'm first of all South African lad. Been in London now for a good while, good 8 years. But I found myself on the 5 yard rush, just watching, just sort of following through Twitter. I reached out during the off season to see where I could hopefully add a little bit of value. And unfortunately, Rob's been encouraging me to write a bit more. I do a bit of a fantasy focus every week and help out. But look, as I'm sure you used to on this pod, we all football mad, and it's yeah. Thanks for having me.
Oh, more than happy to have you here. The Fantasy Focus article series is absolutely fantastic. Some of the things that you're coming out with, have been right on the money as well, which is absolutely incredible to see when, people are being called out by things. It's good to have someone who's getting that consistency. We're getting things spot on. So, all props to you. And we've just got messages from Pittsy, actually. Have fun, boys. He's freezing himself watching his daughter at football practice. So, hello, Pittsy. Hope you enjoy the show. Nathan has got you in good hands here. So, we're going to start off with Thursday night throwback. So, Thursday night was the Ravens heading to the Bucks. They've had their fair share of fourth quarter drama, and it was a close shave against the Browns last week. It was no different this week. It was a close 27-22 win. It wasn't without that final frantic push, 22 points being scored in the fourth quarter by itself. And as usual, we will break it down. Nathan, you've got quarterbacks, so how did they get on this week?
Yeah, it was. Look, it was a good game for all. Obviously, a late night for us in the UK. So catching up first thing this morning. But in terms of the quarterback side, look, let's start straight with Lamar Jackson. Obviously, his highest fantasy score since week 4. I think it was close to 22 points, 21.82 points in the end. A pretty decent completion rate for himself, sort of 27 completed passes from his 38 attempts, 238 yards for 2 touchdowns. Slightly quiet on the carrying side, I think, for his usual standards. He only sort of went for 43 yards with his 9 carries. But look, I think he coped well with losing some of the key offensive guys through injury, and to sort of stay ahead and maintain that sort of lead in the second half was pretty important there. On the Bucks side with Brady, look, there was a little bounce back from last week in terms of his fantasy points, which, look, I'm sure is the last thing he'll be paying any attention to. But 17.1 points for his fantasy score. His completion rate was incredibly down, 26 from his 44 attempts. Good yardage, 325 yards with 1 touchdown. But look, red zone errors kept them away from a bigger score early on, and garbage time throws sort of helped pad up some stats. But I think as a whole, there must be some serious alarm bells there in Tampa. The Ravens, going back to sort of Lamar, sort of again had a gritty win, and I think it's good for them in the AFC North. But look, it's going to be, I think, the NFC South, and Rob, you and I'm sure we'll touch on it soon. But it's getting very messy. It's not pretty. But look, yeah, Rob, what about sort of other offensive bits did you pick up from last night?
So I think some of the biggest news that we've had does look at Baltimore. We had a lot of questionable players before the game. There was Mark Andrews, Rashad Bateman, Gus Edwards, all questionable coming into the game. And the greatest news was that they started, but unfortunately for various reasons, they faded out during the game. Someone out with injuries. Mark Andrews took a pretty bad hit on the shoulder from the looks of things. It looked like the offense was going through him until the injury. He got 3 receptions for 33 yards, 7.8 points before he left the game. even worse for Rashad Bateman as well. I think he got one target, no receptions, ended up with a bagel on that game. Gus Edwards, also got injured, and he walked off the field in his own power, 11 carries, 65 yards, 6.5 points. So, in terms of the big players in that team, didn't perform very well for fantasy purposes, and it was down to Isaiah Likely and Devin Duvernay to repay the faith shown in earlier weeks. Isaiah Likely, 6 receptions on 7 targets, I believe, for 77 yards and a touchdown. Duvernay with 4 receptions, 2 carries, a touchdown on the ground, and 64 scrimmage yards. So the Ravens backups, more or less backups, second stringers came up with the goods there. On the Bucs side of things, not a lot better. We know that Julio got a touchdown late on. Playoff Lenny showed some sparks with a rushing touchdown. He got 68 scrimmage yards off 9 carries and 3 receptions, but it was Mike Evans, biggest contributor. Hit him often and early, 6 receptions on 11 targets. There was a big 50-yard play later on in the game, but I think Brady's looking quite frustrated with the things that are going on. Maybe it's because he missed time in the off season. Kind of missed a bit of gelling, but I think there's 2 teams that needed to find a bit of their feet on the ground here, and one team came away slightly better than the other.
Yeah, look, I think there's a lot of smoke and there's a lot of noise, obviously, in his personal life and coming back and sort of the issues that they're having. Maybe even questions around sort of the whole Arians moving outside of the coaching role and questioning sort of the head coach there in Tampa. It's not easy, but if you look at the bigger picture, fortunately they're in the NFC South this year. Mm-hmm. But look, in terms of sort of bouncing on the other side of the ball here from you, Rob, on the defensive side. Look, I thought both defenses did reasonably well, but this was always going to be a game where both normally have quite potent offenses and score big points. But both defenses seem to sort of shrivel for different reasons. I think there were a lot of errors, obviously a lot of injuries, sort of players being forced to play and maybe perform not at 100%. Both teams, I think, on the defensive side of things ended with 3 sacks, and the Ravens recorded a fumble. The Bucs obviously had that incredible, I think it was a field goal block at the end of the first half, I think it was. But other than that, there were no stellar sort of standouts on the defensive side of things. I think if anything, it was more sort of on the Tampa defensive side. I think Mike Edwards had about 8 tackles, 3 assist tackles. Devin White was kept busy, 6 tackles, 4 assisted tackles. So it was more Tampa doing the majority of sort of the defending for long stages of the game. But look, I think at the end of the day, we all fantasy players here, and we're looking on the offensive side, and it was essentially quite a disappointing evening throughout.
Yeah, I have to agree. I think last week we were spoiled, weren't we, with some of the fantasy performances in Thursday Night Football, and that seems to have been a bit of an outlier compared to some of the previous weeks, and this week has reverted back to that as well. But as you can see in the background here, I've got my Panthers jersey up, getting ready to go to the game on Sunday. And yourself, you are a Saints fan, so as a Saints fan, how did the Bucs result make you feel?
Look, it's always very important for the teams in your conference to lose games. It keeps your hopes alive. It gives you a chance. But I'm not going to be that fan that is sort of begging and hoping for the other teams in the conference to do badly. It is obviously incredibly advantageous to the Saints, but I'm sitting here as a fan of a 2-5 team. The Saints are in very uncharted territories compared to the last 5-6 years. New head coach, lots of injuries, quarterback questions. It's not a pretty or comfortable position to be in. I think the Saints really have to focus on themselves. They really need to find a way of winning games. And I think this big pre-season hype around the defense, getting obviously the Honey Badger in, and sort of a few guys coming back from fitness on the defensive side of things. There was a real sort of almost optimism of how this defense was going to carry the quarterback issues. But we've got to a situation now where we one of the defenses that give up the biggest plays, and that's a real question mark with the Saints going forward. I think from a fantasy point of view, we still haven't seen the best of Kamara yet this season. Obviously, Thomas's injury has been very frustrating. Olave is the one silver lining in the Saints season so far, and I'm so glad in hindsight that this first round pick, wherever it will end up being, was a lot to pay for Olave or in that trade for him. But essentially, it's good to have him on our side. But going back to the original question, Rob, sorry, is I, it's good to see the other teams in the NFC South lose, but I think the Saints really need to just start winning games. And the Raiders are a struggling team this weekend, so it's going to be a very interesting scrap there because both sides had higher aspirations at the start of the season, so it could go either way. And with their explosive players now, with Devontae Adams, I'm not as confident as I was this time last year. How about your side? Your side with the Panthers, Rob? What are you guys holding on to there?
We well, this is the rebuild. I feel like our two teams are probably in different stages of a rebuild at the moment. We've just realised that we need to rebuild, and losing some big pieces, in the last few weeks, it's going to be tough. But I did say last week that losing CMC, the player that we run the offense through, we're actually going to have to think outside the box now. We're going to have to come up with some plays that don't just involve passing CMC the ball 30 times a game. There's going to have to be some different kind of motivation there to get results. And the Tampa game last week, another Tampa game, that could be the perfect springboard. We'll just have to see how it goes. In our chats, we've got Storm, who is also a South African as well, saying Brady crying is good for all of us, and I think we can all agree.
Harsh, but probably true.
Yeah. So we're going to move on to injury report. So a quick recap of Thursday night injuries, and we have covered some of these injuries already in the previous segment. Mark Andrews, Gus Edwards, and Rashad Bateman left at the game at various points, which was a big offensive hit. You covered that as well. The rest of the players saw them through. The good news is the Ravens' bye week is coming up in week 10, so they have one more game left. I believe that's against the Saints. I think that's against your guys next week, so they can rest them until after the bye and push for the playoffs after that. But around the rest of the league, we have got some quarterbacks to look at.
Yeah, sort of looking at some of the quarterback updates over the week, going into sort of the week 8 matchups. Ryan Tannehill has an ankle niggle or ankle injury. He didn't practice on Wednesday, but it sounded like he progressed into sort of limited practice on Thursday, and he's in line to sort of he should start on Sunday against Houston, which should be a good matchup for him. Mm-hmm. So I think for all fantasy owners of Tannehill, they'll be desperate for him to add some value because he has had quite a disappointing season. So this is really a season or a matchup and a weekend he can't afford to miss for those owners of Tannehill. However, Malik Willis obviously had his first team reps this week as well in training, so that could be one to watch. And for all the hype of Malik Willis, from the pre-draft to the absolute dismay post-draft and where he fell to, I think, he will eventually become the starter there in Tennessee, you would imagine. But I think Tannehill will start, and let's see how that progresses. Matt Ryan, he had a bit of a niggle, and obviously there was a lot of commotion and news around sort of his position this week. Obviously, one of the biggest announcements was that he's going to be benched for the rest of the season. So this is obviously quite a blow for a lot of Matt Ryan, maybe ex-Falcon fans, maybe Colts fans who thought that he was going to the promised land to Indy behind this offensive line to become this possibly sort of almost Peyton Manning 2.0 type calling, but that's obviously gone incredibly pear-shaped. So look, this is exciting for Sam Ehlinger. if I'm honest, I'm not too sort of familiar with Sam. I didn't watch him much at college. Rob, do you have any sort of opinion on Sam as a player himself? Is he sort of a bit of a dual threat on both sides, or more sort of a pocket passer?
He featured a lot in the preseason, and from what I recall, he did fairly well with what he was given. There were quite a few runs, and I think some of the betting lines do have him down as quite a running threat as well. You know, they've got him fancied to score some rushing touchdowns, so it could be a far cry from what Matt Ryan's used to. What we're used to seeing with Matt Ryan. I was one of those people who projected Matt Ryan to do great things after his move. It may well just be the ravages of time that have finally gotten to him.
Yeah, and I think, look, with Sam Ehlinger under centre, I think there are going to be a lot of big question marks around Pittman, around sort of some of the key offensive weapons that they have there. But look, it's a new start under centre there in Indy. They've obviously, all you fantasy fans out there, I hope you've run to the waiver wire and try to pick him up as quickly as possible. Yeah. But I'm sure it will be, everyone will have many eyes on this game for Indy. In terms of other injuries at the quarterback, Dak, Tua, Mac Jones, so they all made returns from last week to practice this week. So don't look to be too many setbacks. And it looks like Russell Wilson avoided any injuries on the plane on the long flight over to London. So he should be gracing London Wembley on Sunday, which should be interesting.
Yes, that will be, it would be good. I much prefer to see Russ than Mr. Rypien behind the line. But some of the memes that are coming out about Russ on the plane is incredible. So check that out on Twitter if you can. On to running backs, biggest news, and a lot of our shows have already covered this news. Breece Hall with a torn ACL, biggest devastation out of the Week 7 matches. You know, he was a rookie that was blowing up, and now he's out for the season. The Jets have tried to stem the wound a little bit by bringing in James Robinson to complement Michael Carter, and I think there could be a bit more of a committee role here as well. I think with his pass catching side of things, I think Carter should see a little bit more, but we'll just have to see how this one pans out. So I'm not going to commit either way or the other. After that awful news, we have some good news, and DeAndre Swift has fully practiced Wednesday and Thursday. So that careful approach from the Lions seems to have done the trick. He's back for week 8. I think something to be aware of with this, though, is that Jamal Williams did get some workload even before the injury came along as well. So I would not expect Swift to get 100% of what he had previously. So, temper your expectations. Just enjoy having him back. I think that's the big thing here. Chuba Hubbard, he is out this week. He's been ruled out with his ankle injury. He started last week as part of the committee with Donta Foreman, but it looks like Foreman will take the lead back role for this game, at least against the Falcons. We saw what Donta did last week. He was a big surprise for a lot of people. Someone else who seems to have been ruled out as well, Zeke Elliott with an MCL sprain. He did return to the game last week, but he did not practice for Wednesday or Thursday. So this could be Pollard's season, I reckon so. And then James Conner, limited practice Wednesday and Thursday. He was a game time decision in week 7 early on. It's likely that he could return Sunday if there were no setbacks. Darrell Williams also limited practice on Wednesday. So this could be the end of Eno Benjamin for now. We'll just have to see how these two pan out, because they ribs and knee have kept these two players out for a while.
Yeah, I think just this season has been one of the biggest advocates for the whole concept of handcuffs and picking up your running back handcuffs. I think they've had incredible value this year, and I think it's just something to bear in mind, even for the remainder of the season. Look at your Alex Madisons, look at your sort of other players. You never know what could happen around the corner there. So it should be interesting. I think Pollard should have a big game. And look, if the Cardinals get into a bit of a sling off with the Vikings. I think that we might see Benjamin maybe run out another week just to make sure that Connor's up to speed. But I think all the Cardinals fans out there will want James Conner fit as soon as possible to have sort of a 1-2 punch in both Benjamin and Connor. On the receiver side now, DK Metcalf obviously was carted off last week. He had, I believe, a patella tendon sort of injury. He won't need surgery, I believe, but there's not too much news on him yet. He didn't practice Wednesday or Thursday, and looks incredibly likely he'll miss this week, possibly even a couple of weeks. But there's not too much news out on that yet. Mike Williams apparently sustained a high ankle sprain. And the Chargers sort of, were just pretty unlucky. Obviously, Allen's missed quite a few games now with his hamstring. Mike Williams has this ankle sprain. Herbert needs a few more pieces there. Gerald Everett's had a very good season. For those people at the start of the year that sort of took speculative picks on Gerald Everett because his ADP was really low, and I think players like DeAndre Carter, Josh Palmer could definitely see targets. And then, but it is, I believe, I think it is the Chargers bye this week.
It is, yes.
So yeah, so hopefully there will be more news coming out for later in week 9. Amon-Ra St. Brown obviously had a concussion, so there's sort of more good news though out of Detroit with him sort of back. He's left sort of the protocol and he participated Wednesday on red jersey. So hopefully for the Detroit Lions fans that we get St. Brown back on the field sooner rather than later. I think also in the 49ers, San Francisco, Debo didn't practice on Wednesday and Thursday, sort of hammy sort of strain. These are sort of very niggly sort of ongoing injuries, sort of similar to what I think Keenan Allen's going through. And they're just those injuries that they're very slow to heal, and it is very detrimental to sort of on-field performance. Other sort of very quickly, other wide receivers, I think Alan Lazard had a bit of a shoulder niggle, so he didn't practice on Wednesday or Thursday last week. Look, Green Bay will be desperate for targets there. Rodgers obviously came out, I think it was on the Pat McAfee show, with quite a few sort of comments about sort of the players standing up and young players not being ready. So it'll be interesting to see who puts their hand up, as well as Corey Davis for the Jets being ruled out. So who knows? Maybe Elijah Moore, this is his chance to go get the trade that he wants, or win the respect of the Jets fans. But regardless, I think the Jets are in a good place, and up against the Patriots, it should be a very interesting battle there. Maybe a changing of the guards in that AFC East. But yeah, Rob, do any of those injuries sort of stand out to you sort of for fantasy value or fantasy knocks or elsewhere to sort of work on?
So the Debo injury is, like I said, it's the hamstring issue. It's been an injury that's plagued a lot of players leading up to games. So we saw Keenan, he had an issue with his hamstring as well, and they put him in for a little bit. And then we've had other times where players have gone in with a hamstring issue and then they've just not played at all, or they've just run routes and not really been involved in any targets as well. So that and the CMC trade, I think, is really going to hurt Samuel's value. I think it's a player that we need to watch, and we know that he was vying for a trade at the start of the season as well. So there's something in there that we need to monitor in terms of Samuel's usage, and it may be that he pushes for a trade as well. There are other players as well who are looking for trades too. Chase Claypool, Brandon Cooks, they've been mentioned as being trade targets. So we could see either of those two maybe head to the Packers. So maybe they don't need Lazard in the future.
Yeah, look, I think just quickly, Rob. Also, I think in the Giants will definitely be in the market possibly for another receiver now that Tony's ended up in Kansas. But as you say, it's anything can happen on trade deadline and when it's coming up.
Yeah, it's coming up soon. Is it Tuesday? I think Tuesday's the deadline.
I believe so.
Ooh, exciting. Tight ends now. This is another prospect that people were really liking the look of. Daniel Bellinger the Giants tight end, and this could be another reason why they're looking for a replacement wide receiver. He may require surgery on a fractured eye socket in September last weekend. He'd been a stream target for a lot of people, a waiver wire favourite. It's hard to pinpoint a timeline when nothing else has been announced yet, but what a big loss to that offense. Dalton Schultz, he has returned again to the injury report. He aggravated his knee problem last week against the Lions. It is worth noting that Dak has provided Schultz with the only 2 games where he's had double-figure points this season. So with limited practices Wednesday, Thursday, should be good for Sunday, but he could be one that you might have to take out at short notice. One player that is definitely ruled out, David Njoku. His high ankle sprain is probably going to keep him out for about 4 weeks, and that is a tough one as well because he has also been providing for that Browns offense. And then, as we confirmed last week, Pat Frymouth, he had returned last week, which was great news for Pittsy. That unrelated concussion is nothing to do with the reason he had limited practice on Wednesday this week. He should be playing against the Eagles, and Lewis is the only has decided that he's the only Steeler that he's comfortable playing this week. So our third segment, we move on to weak points.
Yeah, so sort of looking, let's focus sort of on the quarterbacks to start off here and sort of favorable matchups. Off the top, the Raiders have given up an incredible amount of points this season to quarterbacks. And Andy Dalton, obviously having been announced as the starter, should have a chance there. And I think both teams are coming off very, very upsetting sort of starts to the season, which we've already mentioned. And I could see this game becoming a real messy, sort of similar to Thursday night football last week with the Cardinals and the Saints. The Saints defense has had lots of question marks here, giving up big plays. So we could see hopefully a high scoring game for the neutral. And as a Saints fan, hopefully a high scoring game with a favorable result for the Saints. But regardless, Andy Dalton is probably worth streaming. And maybe even if you're really out there, and this is more sort of, I'm sure, on the tight end side, but Taysom Hill could easily throw a cheeky little touchdown. That would be great for us all. But also another matchup is, I think, PJ Walker for the Panthers against the Falcons. The Falcons have given up a few points there, and I think PJ Walker is keeping the job. Who knows? I think Sam Darnold's trying to come back from fitness, and I think Baker Mayfield are both eager to rush back to try win this job here in Carolina with sort of the new regime. But I think the big thing there is to try look at PJ Walker, and again another NFC South sort of derby match crunch game there. The Falcons will sort of like their chances now, having seen the Bucks lose on Thursday, so they would want to get one game ahead. So we could see the Falcons playing a bit more attacking football, which could open up the game a bit more. So I like PJ Walker as a possible flex for the week. What about the running back side of things, Rob?
So the team that's given up the most points to running backs are the Texans. They come up against King, Derrick Henry, and the Titans. So I reckon we could expect a bumper workload. So in hindsight, maybe it doesn't matter if Tannehill is back just yet. If they want to take it easy with him and put Malik in, then that's something that they could do. We've also got to remember Dontrell Hilliard behind Derrick Henry as well. It has been more or less very well involved in the pass catching side of things. Although I have been surprised that Henry's had as much as many targets as he has in the opening part of this season. He just seems to be involved on that side of the ball too. Lions are up next. They are against the Dolphins. Someone to monitor, Raheem Mostert. He has been limited in practice this week, so maybe there's a reduced role for him here, and Chase Edmonds could see some more involvement. They've got plenty of running backs to choose from there as well, so we'll have to see who gets the nod.
Yeah, and then sort of onto the wide receivers. I think further to sort of our PJ Walker sort of take, I think the Falcons have given up quite a considerable amount of points to receivers this year, and the Panthers could be a team to look at for options, starting options. In terms of sort of DJ Moore, he obviously had a good week last week, and maybe even possibilities for sort of maybe some outside starters as well on the Panthers side of the ball. With regards to the Steelers as well, the Steelers have been very un-Steelers-like, unfortunately for Pittsy, and they've had a real struggle keeping receivers guarded and covered throughout the season. So look, it's not getting any easier with the Eagles team off a bye. You've got AJ Brown and Devontae Smith, arguably one of the strongest wide receiver pairings in the league. Greg Ward returns sort of as another sort of outside target there. But look, I think this is a good matchup for both AJ Brown and Devontae Smith, and you just sort of hope that they both can be productive and not one overly productive and the other less so. Another one to watch, and also it could come down to sort of game script is the Titans Texans game, and I think the Titans have been quite poor in their secondary this year, so they could well get to a lead on the running side of things, pounding the rock with Henry, so it could force Davis Mills to have to air it out a bit. And we all know Brandon Cooks has been sort of heavily linked with trades this week. So it would be a good statement game to really go off for him personally. So yeah, I think maybe some outside options there. Chris Moore, Philip Dorsett, maybe even possible streamers and starters this week in deeper leagues on sort of on the flex side. But yeah, I think Texans receivers, Eagles receivers, and Panthers receivers are where the value is this week.
I have to agree. Yeah, especially some of those big names in there as well. You wouldn't be ever considering taking them out of lineups. Brown, Moore, Brandon Cooks. Those three big players. They put big points. That one team could very much have them in the lineup, and that would be a win guaranteed more or less. Weakest against tight ends, and we've covered about Mr. Bellinger being out because the Giants are up against the Seahawks, who have been the weakest against tight ends. Their backups, Tanner Hudson and Chris Myrick, they're listed behind, and you never know. It might not be too late for a trade to be made to take advantage of that. So if there's any Titans out there, Mike Gesicki, he could be one that moves to the Giants. There's still plenty of time, but would it be done in time for Sunday? Who knows? And then the Cardinals, they're up against the Vikings. So Irv Smith, he's seen a bit of a safe target floor in the last 5 games, at least 4 targets. So he could be a favoured outlet here as well. And then finally, the third team that we're going to cover, the Raiders, they're up against the Saints. We saw what Juwan Johnson did last week. He's been limited in practice with the hamstring injury. So whether or not he's going to have the same impact as he did in week 7 is another thing. Adam Troutman's out altogether. So Taysom Hill's a tight end, isn't he?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah. Possibly. As I said, look, I think that the way the Saints are going, I think they have to find a way of using Taysom Hill. I think that is when the Saints are at their most dangerous. And I think, especially with Andy Dalton and Taysom Hill, I think it's quite a nice sort of. It's very difficult to set up a defense for a player like Taysom Hill who can do many things, but at the same time, it's serious boom or bust play.
Yeah, definitely. I think the only week I recommended him was the week that he didn't boom. He boomed either side of that recommendation. So, spoilers, he won't be my flex of the week this week. So we will move on to that segment now. Here is flex of the week. So as our guest on this show, we talked about having a flex each here. So Nathan, who is your flex of the week for this week?
So yeah, Rob, I was surprised that we didn't overlap sort of in our sort of pre-notes, although we were very much on the same wavelength. And my flex of the week this week, it's a little bit down to sort of a game script. Possible opportunities. I think Darius Slayton is one that I think if you have on your roster stashed deep somewhere, he's worth sneaking onto your flex. I think over the last few weeks, he's started to see more targets. He's had, I think, so far this season, it has been an underwhelming stats if you do look at it, with 11 receptions for only 166 yards. But I do see him as quite a big sort of safety valve a little bit for Daniel Jones. And as Jones has been scrambling on the play action side of things, I think Slayton has found himself and created open plane for him. And especially with Bellinger down, who was the other safety valve, it will be, I think he will see more than 5 targets at least this game, with possibility for some big plays. And if he can get 2-3 sort of 20-yard plays, we're talking at a stat line here of comfortably getting over 50 yards receiving and hopefully crossing for a touchdown as well. So my flex of the week is Darius Slayton to break double-figure points this week.
I like it very much. I think now we've seen a few players drop out, and the clarity of that wide receiver group coming a bit more into the fore. I think, there's a big role for Darius Slayton in that group alongside Wandale. So, I very much enjoy that one as well. And at risk of choosing the same one, I managed to decide on 2. Thankfully, neither of them overlapped with yours, but I'm going to choose just one of them. Murph mentioned him in the podcast earlier this week. Marquise Goodwin is my flex of the week this week. A big week last week after Metcalf left the game, and we are likely not to see Metcalf in this week's game as well. His snaps have hovered around 50% even before the injury, so that should go up with the injury, and with that means more opportunity. So like Slayton has, there should be a bit of a flaw here with the targets he sees. He's seen 5 targets in 2 of the last 3 games. This is a tough game against the Giants, as we've talked about. It could go either way. It could be a sling fest, it could be a ground game, but both teams have lost key pieces in the match last week, and that should bring other players up the depth chart into the mix. And Goodwin, as we know, he is experienced enough to handle a decent workload, and you can't turn down a player that does a backflip in the final play of the game either.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it was quite a nice coincidence that we picked both the same game essentially to pick our flexes for the weekend. So I do think the Giants and the Seahawks, as it's been very publicly announced, it's the only matchup this week with 2 winning record teams. Surprisingly, who would have said this 12 months ago, even 6 months ago? So look, I think credit to Brian Dable and what he's doing with the G-men, and I think credit to Geno Smith and how he's taken the reins in Seattle as well. So I think we should expect a high scoring game there. So with the men that are down, as you mentioned, Rob, DK Metcalf, and in terms of, look, who knows what Kenneth Walker can be unleashed to do again this week as well, and Saquon. We've got 2 incredibly explosive running backs, but I think these quarterbacks will have to sling it as well at some stage. So I like both picks on Marquise Goodwin and Slayton.
Me too. Well, thank you so much for joining me on this week's show, Nathan. It's been an honor and a pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much for coming on. Whereabouts can we find your work?
Yeah, so yeah, it's pretty much the majority of it's done through 5 Yard with yourself. I write that weekly article, which is usually published on a Wednesday morning, Wednesday or Thursday morning, sort of British time. So it picks 3 or 4 of my favorite matchups that I want to sort of look at for the week. Outside of that, I'm just on Twitter at MountainDrew92. Obviously, that's credit to one of my heroes, Drew Brees. And otherwise, I'm always open. The DMs are open for any sort of questions, and yeah, stay tuned to 5 Yard as well.
Fantastic. I certainly recommend getting on that Fantasy Focus article series. So thanks once again. As for the rest of you, we may have Pittsy and Lewis back next week. It's up in the air at the moment, but until then, week 9, let's go. Keep rushing.